primarily abdominal work, but it will also be working a bit on the shoulders and the arms. Many of these poses can be done on the floor, but I'm going to demonstrate them today using the chair as the surface. For those of us who choose not to get down on the floor on any given day, this is a perfectly acceptable alternative. We're going to start in our triangle, so we're going to step our feet a comfortable distance apart. We're more concerned about stability than distance. We're going to turn our back foot halfway forward, our front foot all the way with a nice straight leg. And we think about pushing our hips back as far as we can get them. We're using our abdominal strength, our core strength, to get ourselves in a position where we can get the spine parallel to the floor. So our bottom hand might be somewhere on our leg, or it might be on our foot, but we don't want to be sagging into the pose. We want to use our core strength to keep a nice straight back from tailbone to the tip of our head. Top hand can move up to the sky. We're trying to get a straight line from fingertip to fingertip while maintaining that same parallel to the floor spine. Pushing the hips back to stretch a little more through the hamstring and the front leg. And then bringing our hand down to find our center of gravity. We're going to shift our weight onto our front foot, bring our hand further forward out to the side. As we then find our strength in that supporting leg, lifting the back leg as high as we can so that we can get it parallel with our hips. And once we start energizing into our supporting leg, then lifting the top hand up to the sky. Slowly bringing that foot down. Bringing our center of gravity back toward our center line before we rotate and move to the opposite side. So again, distance between the feet is what gives us stability. Hips push back. Core muscles keep us from sagging too low into the pose. We stay high with fingertips on the ground or up on our leg or on a block. Top hand comes in alignment with the bottom hand. We're trying to make sure we don't over-rotate, pull it behind us. And then into our balance. Front knee bends so we can get our hand on the floor, finding that balancing point between the hand and the foot, lifting the back leg. Trying to get it even with our hips if we can, and then top hand up to the sky. And then as we bring that foot down, we're either going to come down to the floor on all fours, or we're going to move over to the chair so we can put our hands underneath our shoulders and bring our feet back so that we can get our hips and knees and feet in alignment. Going into our cat and cow not only to strengthen the abdominal area but also to stretch it. So we start with our cat pose, arching the back, starting with the tailbone, pushing down, lifting with the belly, lifting with the rib cage, lastly chin into chest. And then our cow pose. Tailbone starts moving up and back as we drop the belly, drop the rib cage, lastly lift the head. Articulating each vertebra as we go from the lowest part of the spine, exaggerating the stretch upward, and the same thing as we come in our cow face. Exaggerating the drop down. Trying to get as much of a stretch as we can. Alternating, strengthening the abdominals when we go into our cat, stretching them when we come into our cow face. And then into a spinal balance. So we're going to take one leg and lift it, even with our hips if we can, and to bring the opposite hand straight forward. We're pushing through the heel of the lifted leg, pushing through the fingertips, trying to get as much of a straight line as we can down the entire body, from fingertip to heel. Tuning into our breath. Hand down, foot down, or knee down if we're on the floor, and switching to the opposite side. And then hands together. Getting ready to go into a plank. We'll get the appropriate distance between feet and hands by going into our down dog. So if we're on the floor, all fours, hands are going to come one hand length in front. We're going to turn the toes under, lift the knees. If we're using the chair, we're going to keep walking back. In either case, we want to make sure we don't have the shoulders breaking that straight line from our hands to our tailbone. So in either case, we think about taking our shoulders and pushing them down toward our toes. Starfish hands, taking the weight off the wrist, outer edges of the collarbone pulling up toward our ears. And then we're going to bring the shoulders forward over the hands as we lift with the head of the femur, push down with the tailbone so we have a straight line from the tip of our head down through our heels. We're pulling the shoulder blades in toward our spine, down toward our waistline, so our back is as flat and as strong as it can be. We're going to take this to a side plank. If we're on the floor, we can drop the right knee, or the backside knee in my case, down to the ground, but we'll keep it straight if possible, taking our hand to our midline before we roll on our feet out to the side. Maybe leaving the hand resting on our side or bringing it up to the sky. And then coming back towards center. Coming back into our down dog, or maybe into our child's pose if we need a rest. Maybe doing some wrist circles if our hands are getting tired. We'll come forward into another plank. And so I don't have my back to you. I'm going to repeat the same plank that I did before, but you, of course, will move to the opposite side to keep the balance. So shifting hand to our midline, rotating around to the side, stacking shoulders over shoulders. And again, if we're on the floor, we can drop the right knee down to the ground, maybe even lift the top leg. And then rotating back. We're going to drop down on our elbows. We're going to make sure that the elbows are underneath our shoulders. We can interlace our fingers and leave our hands slightly separated. We're going to roll our chin down, shake it out, and then we're going to keep a straight line again as we choose to go into our forearm plank. We're going to do the same thing we did with our full arm plank. Straight line from the tip of our head to our heels. If we're on the floor, we can have those knees down. We're still thinking about no tush-up, so we're pressing down with our tailbone. At the same time, lifting with the head of the femur so we're not sagging the hips down. And then pushing up. We'll come down and kneel down. If we're on the floor, we'll stand up. Otherwise, we're going into our camel pose so that we can stretch the abdominal area rather than contract it. So we're going to start, regardless of where we are, with our hands on our back, either fists on our hips or palms against our kidneys. We tuck the tailbone forward. We lift with the iliac crest on the front of that pelvic bowl. We think about zipping up from our pubic bone to our navel to our solar plexus, the entire length of the abdominals, pushing that heart up to the sky, watching the bend in the neck. If we're on the floor, we can let our hands slide down to the backs of the thighs, fingertips to the calves, or hands all the way to the heels of the feet, as long as we don't start pulling the hips back. If we're standing, we might want to think about bringing the arms out and up. And then coming forward. We'll come into a down dog. And this time, if we're going to use the chair, we want to come into our cobra rather than our up dog. We're going to start with the down dog. This time I'm going to demonstrate coming into the floor instead so that we can see the variation of the pose if we're not using the chair for support. So starting with our down dog, this time instead of coming into a plank, we're going to come into a chaturanga. So we're going to pull our shoulders forward, but instead of leaving the arms straight, we're going to bend the elbows, bringing our shoulders down, and then we're going to drop the knees to the floor. We're going to position ourselves so that our feet are slightly internally rotated, heels slightly toward the outside. We're going to make sure we push the tailbone into the ground. Just like we did in our camel, we're going to stretch the front of the body. If we want to do our cobra, our hands will be under our shoulders. We want to do our up dog, maybe move the hands a little further back. Either way, we leverage into our arms. We stretch the front of the body so the knees, lower thighs are on the ground for Cobra, Uttanasana, or we lift so that we're in our up dog. Knees to the ground. And coming down into a seated pose. And thinking that we can do any kinds of crunches that we want to work on the abdominals, but for now we're going to do some boat pose. So we plant our feet flat on the floor, knees bent. Our idea here is to get the upper legs in parallel with each other all the time. We don't want one higher than the other. And the closer we can keep working the body in toward our legs, using the strength of the abdominals, the more building strength we'll get in the front. So we can start with hands holding onto the back of the legs or out to either side. We're merely going to lift one foot until our legs are even. Pulling shoulder blades down the back, pulling the entire body forward, not just the shoulders. And then dropping that foot, switching to the opposite side. Dropping that foot. We'll go into our full boat. So we're going to lift both feet together. Many of us might want to put our hands underneath the thighs for a little more support. We still want to think about keeping that back flat. And we're going to lift both feet together, keeping the knees bent or straightening out the legs. Another variation of this pose is to wrap 2 fingers and a thumb around the toes, hold onto the back of the feet, and bring our legs up so that they're directly in front of our sit bones. And if we'd like to, we can now open our legs to either side, coming into our blossoming lotus. And then folding our legs, coming into our Sukhasana. We'll decide whether or not we'd like to spend the next few minutes in some final guided imagery or meditation, or whether or not we'd like to move on and do another set of poses. Stretching arms high to the sky, palms together.